10 years, next 10 years is where we will see the benefits of having scaled solar significantly.
Industry for around more than 30 years, like spread across various industries from digital optics to solar in its initial days.
A family of 5 earning 5,000 rupees a month was happy to pay for energy that they were getting through a small prepaid meter. And they used to get power for about 2 hours a day in that. And they were saying that we want, as I just mentioned, India aspires to have more than 50% of its energy generated through renewable sources by in 2009-10. Whether to focus on power generation or to focus on manufacturing.
Welcome, Mr. Vivek, to One Young India.
Call me Vivek. It makes me feel more comfortable.
Perfect. So again, you always typically have to ask, specifically in the Indian setup, because unfortunately, fortunately, whichever way people may like to see it, we've seen that sometimes people don't like to be called by the first name, specifically in the Indian professional setup.
I got over this hump on my first day of work, way back in 1991, when I joined Xerox in India, Modi, which used to be Modi Xerox, and there everybody used to be addressed by their first name.
Yeah.
And even my branch manager, who was about 30 years elder, senior to me, we used to call him SP. And I could never call him SP. And I kept trying finding out what is Mr. Jain's first name. Nobody knew his first name either. So I would call him Mr. Jain, and he almost got upset that stop calling me Mr. Jain. I am SP here. So that's where it took me a week to move from Mr. Jain and Mr. Verma to their first name. So yeah, I can fully appreciate that. It takes time.
Yeah. Wow. Great. So Vivek, speaking to you, and we've spoken before off camera, I know you're a seasoned professional. You've spent time in the industry for around more than 30 years, like spread across various industries from digital optics to solar in its initial days to now being with a company which is, again, primarily focused on research and development, innovation, and as well as manufacturing. I'd love to know specifically from you that since you've seen the industry from its very early stages, specifically in the Indian industry, in the Indian context, where do you see the solar energy going in the next 10 years?
Oh, so often solar energy is considered to be a new industry, right? And more so in India, solar mission began sometime in 2009-10, and ever since then, solar became mainstream. But actually, solar energy is not that new. The first use of solar energy goes back thousands of years back, when solar energy used to be used in those lenses to create fire. And then our international space station is powered 100% by solar panels, which began in 1958. So yeah, solar energy has been in use, but yes, what has changed in the last 15 years is its efficiency. And that's what makes solar energy commercially viable. And the way volumes have grown in the last 15 years globally, and in India in 10 years, just to give an idea, the first solar tenders for utility scale solar were at about a megawatt level. The tariff given at that time was 18 rupees per unit. And today in auctions, the tariff which is discovered is generally between 2 rupees 25 paisa to 2 rupees 80-90 paisa. I mean, I could be off by a few paisa here and there, but that's where the solar cost is. And now that we've reached this stage of cost, it is more viable today to set up a solar installation than to set up a new thermal plant. And over the next 10 years, I see no comeback. India already has a target of about 500 gigawatts to be installed by 2030, right? And if I recall correctly, recently the commitment which has been made by India is that by 2075 we will be 100% renewable. And today, renewables are at a small fraction of our energy generation and consumption levels. So 10 years, next 10 years is where we will see the benefits of having scaled solar significantly.
So would it be safe to assume that, say, maybe the majority of our energy consumption is going to come from renewable sources?
No, that is still some time away because, as I just mentioned, India aspires to have more than 50% of its energy generated through renewable sources by 2030. It's an extremely ambitious target, but definitely worth going after. So by 2030, which is in the next 7 to 10 years, if we are able to, let's say in 10 years, if we are able to achieve 50% of our renewable energy sources, of our energy consumption and generation through renewable sources, I think that will be a fantastic achievement for our country.
So this is very interesting because, from my understanding of geopolitics, oil as an energy security has typically played a very important role. We are seeing that unfolding even with the Russia-Ukraine war, ongoing war. It's primarily because of the energy crisis in Europe that a commodity is sort of dictating how world relations and international new world order is going to be. Do you think solar has that sort of a potential to disrupt this?
Oh, definitely. I think energy security has been one of the objectives way back, even 10 years back, 10, 12 years back. And that's where comes the difference between solar power generation and manufacturing for solar power generation equipment, right? And I'll come to that in a bit. Before that, just to give you another piece of very interesting reference, that oil versus solar or renewable energy. Let's keep it to solar. Solar and oil, for every incremental production of oil, oil keeps getting more expensive, right? Because once you've exploited all the resources which are easily accessible, you've done that. Now you need to go deeper into the earth to dig, so it becomes more expensive. With every extra watt of solar energy exploited, it becomes cheaper. Because the scale of manufacturing equipment which generates or captures photovoltaics drives its cost reduction. And that's what has resulted in the cost in India coming down from 18 rupees to close to 2 rupees 50 paisa, 2 rupees 75 paisa in the last 10 years.
And do you see it going down further?
Now, there's one unique feature of solar is its intermittence. And when I say intermittence, means that till such time sun is shining, you're generating power. But when the sun is not shining, you don't generate power, which is a feature addressed by the conventional energy sources like coal or oil or nuclear, right? So for addressing that aspect, there is another development which is happening as we speak is called energy storage. There were many ways explored for storing energy, but today with the advancements in batteries, especially driven by automobile sector, which has brought the costs down for lithium-ion batteries to almost a fourth of what they used to be 7-8 years back. One of the biggest beneficiaries of that technology development is solar. And with that reduction in cost and capex of energy storage, we believe the biggest bottleneck in solar energy and that of intermittence will get addressed through energy storage. So while solar energy generation costs will keep coming down without storage, but when you add storage, it will become a bit more expensive, yet it will address an issue which will be vital for a much wider adoption of solar, because then you can have solar energy 24/7 with storage, and with storage becoming more and more efficient. So there might be a bit of a plateauing as we transition from non-storage driven to storage driven grid connected solar energy. That might go up a bit sometime, but then eventually as efficiencies and storage technologies kick in, there is a massive room for solar costs to go down even further from where we are today.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you mentioned that storage, so I think it's also would be a nice point to talk about electric vehicles, mobility. Um, so, although there is adoption, and the government of India has also have that FAME scheme going on for faster adoption of electric vehicles. That said, still, majority of the energy in India is still generated through coal, which is again a pollution creating agent. So we cannot truly call electric vehicles green till the time we have like you mentioned, that we have more than majority of our overall energy consumption coming from renewable sources of energy. But do you feel that with these developments and the adoption of EV and the way it is going right now, we could see solar getting into mobility? I've seen there are prototypes of airplanes which are right now being operated completely on solar energy. Obviously, there is a concept of cars. People are talking about solar roads. So where do you see solar energy taking that role when it comes to mobility?
So I'll have my limitations on in-depth knowledge on mobility. However, what I can share is the small role that solar has been playing and will play more and more important role going forward is something called, so there is solar, there are rooftop solar, ground-mounted solar, off-grid solar, on-grid solar. These are conventional segments within solar, and I don't want to get into those details. There's another segment called BIPV, which is called Building Integrated Photovoltaics. So if you see massive commercial buildings which have glass facades, instead of those glass facades, they integrate photovoltaics so that that building generates power for part of its consumption. So that's called BIPV, Building Integrated Photovoltaics. It's been around for years. It hasn't really taken off as much as was expected. And there are reasons around that. The new segment which is evolving now is called VIPV, and that's called Vehicle Integrated Photovoltaics. And that's where we are doing work with a pioneering Dutch company which manufactures only photovoltaic-driven I stand corrected. They are developing battery-driven cars which have integrated photovoltaics in them. And we are very proud as Endurans that our company is their strategic partner, which provides them the technology which enables solar to get integrated into their vehicle. And just solar helps this car to go 70 kilometers extra in a day. So it enhances its range without charging by 70 kilometers in a day. So that's about 10%, if I recall the number correctly. So yes, Toyota has been doing a lot of work on integrating photovoltaics into their cars. They were amongst the first. They began about 8 or 10 years back. So indeed, solar with enhanced efficiency, and I've used this word efficiency quite frequently, and let me just elaborate a bit on this. The amount of sunshine which the planet Earth gets in an hour, if the whole of it is converted to energy, we will have enough energy to power our planet Earth for 1 year.
Wow. So we are way off right now.
So the kind of efficiency levels we are at right now is minuscule of that. So that's where lies the path ahead of us. That's the opportunity that lies ahead of us on how much we can do with solar energy. And that's where lies the opportunity for us to integrate solar into vehicles. Right now, and again, I could be wrong, but till about 5 years back, the physics limit of converting solar into energy was about 29-30%. as per science, the current materials which exist, which we are using to convert solar energy into to electricity, has had a limit of about 29%. I'm sure there are new developments which have happened in the last 3-4 years, which takes it further up to maybe 32, 33, 34%, but not commercialized yet. This 29% limit has been around for last at least 10 years, ever since I joined this industry. And the real efficiency which I have seen improve, I have sold a solar panel which used to operate at about 6% efficiency. Today, solar panels commercially produced in mass is at about 21, 22% of efficiency. So we are still the most efficient solar panels available commercially today is converting only about a fifth of solar energy. So that's how massive the opportunity that lies ahead of us for the youngsters to go out there and do innovation and do things which will help us convert this source to for our needs and impact the world.
Very, very interesting. So, like you mentioned, that right now we are at only one-fifth the efficiency. And we are also limited by one more geological factor. That is, I don't know whether that's a limitation that is purely in terms of efficiency, that there are countries lying between the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, which are considered as the most efficient. And I think that is the International Solar Alliance. It's typically countries lying between those bands. What do you think? Like, would they be also getting into this OPEC sort of a political? Can this be politicized, solar energy, in times to come?
Well, I have very little knowledge of politics behind solar energy, so I'm not qualified enough to comment upon that. And whatever comments I'll make, probably I'll not be accurate. But whatever little understanding I've had is that there were these plans about 7-8 years back to create, I think it was Europe, some of the leading countries in Europe who got together and decided to set up a largest ever conceived at that time in the desert in Africa, set up the solar installation. And from there, the plan was to wheel power to mainland Europe. However, the politics of various countries involved and the geopolitics involved didn't let that take off. And at that time, there were also technological challenges. But at some point in time, this will happen. However, in the countries which are part of Solar Alliance, especially in this between the tropics, which are mostly underdeveloped or developing countries, it's the off-grid technology which is likely to impact people the most. And by off-grid, again, I don't want to get into the technicalities. These are people who are not on-grid, let's put it that way, right? And that's where I realized 10 years back that what mobility did to telecom access in India, solar had the capability of doing same to energy access in India without really making investments in grid, because there was still way back then, there were about 30% of India's population didn't have access to energy. They had not seen an electric switch at that time. And today, of course, a lot has happened. Energy has reached the remotest of villages, but still it does not mean that they have a 24/7 power or even power for more than 4 hours in a day. So off-grid is something which makes these small products, starting from a little lantern up to eco-grids, these are called. You might have heard of large grids, then there are microgrids. So what microgrid stands for is that you set up a 100 kilowatt solar generation unit, and from there you power industry, commercial, and residential in the region, if there is not enough power there in the region, or if the grid hasn't reached there. Here we are not talking about 100 kilowatt grids. In fact, a lot of work we did up there in Leh and Ladakh, because the challenge back, the Leh and Ladakh didn't have energy. They didn't have even network back 10 years back. So most of the power generation used to happen through diesel gensets. And to carry diesel to those remote villages in Leh and Ladakh at that altitude and in that terrain used to make it so expensive. So Government of India had a special plan to set up to replace all those diesel gensets with solar. And in my previous past life or past organizations, we did a lot of work along with our competitors to convert those diesel generating powerhouses to solar units, and they are operating even today. And contrary to popular belief, there is another notion that hotter the climate, better the solar will be, which is incorrect. Actually, there's a point beyond which solar efficiency starts going down. For every 1 degree increase in temperature, ambient temperature, the power generation goes down. That's technology. It's called temperature coefficient of photovoltaics. So Ladakh, Leh, which has amongst the best quality of sun and a temperature always less than 20 degrees, is probably the best location in our country to generate solar power.
Because it sits on a plateau and
It sits on a plateau, it's closer to the sun, the quality of sun is good, the quantity of sun is good, and the temperature is less, lower out there. So yeah, we I'm forgetting in what context I started this. What was your question and where have I gone? I just want to connect it with that.
so it really does not matter. So we put in something very interesting here. And I want to be just stitching that further. You said that we were talking about Leh Ladakh, and that this is immediately going in my mind. Leh Ladakh happens to be the part of a plateau which is in the northern parts, north of Himalayas. Tibet happens to be the
roof of the world.
Yes, it's called the roof of the world, the third pole, and so on and so forth. So, from what I understand, that's typically the best place for solar energy.
So if it gets good sun,
Yeah.
then it's good place to generate solar power. However, how far is it from the place where it'll get consumed is an important part, because to transport power is expensive also.
Yeah.
So that's also a challenge with Ladakh and Leh. You can generate a lot of power, but you can use a lot of it within. Suppose for Jammu and Kashmir, yes, it's a great place to generate power, and entire region can be fed power from there. However, to carry it to Kerala is or to even Himachal or to UP will be an expensive affair. However, I'm sure that's an area where youngsters can focus on how to transfer energy in a cheap manner, because it's not just renewable. The costs, generating solar power has become very cheap, but to store and to take it to the place of consumption is very expensive.
So basically, it's going to be decentralized. Like if you're talking about decentralized finance, this will be decentralized energy.
Off grid. So that's
Yes.
decentralized. So off grid, how you create small So we create. That's what I. So we created these microgrids in Ladakh and Leh, a 50 kilowatt or a 40 kilowatt or a 50 or a even 20 kilowatts or 100 kilowatts, which would power a village of 5,000 people. So then and there itself, solar comes. It's like powering International Space Station.
Yeah.
Because there's no way you can power that.
Yeah.
Similarly, you're powering the remotest of locations in our country, and with the size and length and breadth of our country, it can play a significant role in impacting lives and changing lives and raising standards of living. Cost of power there's another experience which I had way back in 2016 when we were doing some work and we were trying to explore what we can do. So we do a lot of, when I was in my previous organization, we were part of an innovation group where innovation was not just in developing materials or manufacturing capabilities. We were also looking at innovating business models which can help impact lives at the bottom of the pyramid. And for that, I, along with one of the big four consulting firms, we did some work in the remote villages in UP, which had no power. So we went and I met at least 100 families in 7 or 8 villages, along with some of the third-party consultants. And it was amazing and mind-boggling and yet a humbling experience on what rate at which you and I consume power at, and we crib about it, oh, 8 rupees or 9 rupees or 10 rupees is too expensive per unit. Just guess the number at which a family of five earning 5,000 rupees a month was happy to pay for energy that they were getting through a small prepaid meter. And they used to get power for about 2 hours a day in that. And they were saying that we want more. Guess the per unit price that they were paying in form of a 10 rupees chota recharge for that power meter. 100 rupees a unit. Oh God. If you converted that prepaid to the number of watt hours they consumed to replace that kerosene lamp with one light and a small fan, they were paying 100 rupees per unit in 2016.
And right now?
I don't know what's going on. So that's where came the opportunity. However, we did not have, this is very highly decentralized. So you really need, and there are companies who were trying to, so this was a real small micro grid, or I would say a pico grid, or a very small grid of about 800 watts was set up by a company. It was feeding about 20 or 40 homes in that village. And these were homes who were using kerosene. Their moment it was night, children couldn't study, women couldn't cook, men would sit out and they couldn't sleep. So their day was getting extended by having power. You should have seen smiles on their faces when they were able to get power for those 2 extra hours in the evening and 2 extra hours in the morning. And they wanted more, and they were willing to pay that price. And they used to have this 10 rupee recharge. Moment this 10 rupee recharge got over, their power would get disconnected. And they had these power meters installed, and this company had done. But somehow why has that? We knew that it's the worst technology was used to make those grids cheapest. That was the focus. And then there was also this thing happening at that time that, oh, power would reach every home.
So even right now, I think there is this scheme, Har Ghar Bijli Yojana. And that, sort of brings me to this part of energy inclusion, which you mentioned. Financial inclusion ke liye we have, number of programs. For example, we have the Jan Dhan Yojana accounts and so on and so forth. So while the government has policies in place, but you've been there in this sector from the very days you mentioned, from the very days of early policy. Do you think policy in this area is sort of stopping it right now, or is our solar policy in the right direction to make sure that India becomes the largest producer of?
I think India had to make a choice in 2009-10 whether to focus on power generation or to focus on manufacturing. And to drive demand, to bring the costs down at that time, very clearly India made the choice of generating more solar power way back in 2009-10, then setting up manufacturing of solar power generators or equipment which generates solar power. And as a result of which, a lot of imports happened. We grew significantly. I mean, against our 20 gigawatt target in 2009, by 2022, we are at 60 gigawatts already today. We may not have done 100 gigawatts, but we've done quite well on generating solar power. And but for pandemic, we probably would have added another, say, 10 to 20 gigawatts. So we would be close to 80 gigawatts, much closer to a 100 gigawatt target. However, the focus on manufacturing has come in only in the last 2-3 years, which exposes us to the geopolitical risks. So almost 80% of our imports in India 80% of equipment used to generate power, which is solar panel, is imported.
And it's coming from?
It's coming from China, because that's where 70% of the global production happens, like any other industry. And China's low costs helped India to bring the costs down, which could have taken much longer to bring the costs down. So there's always a trade-off on what you want first. So Government of India chose to bring the costs down through imports, and now it has recognized the need to have security and self-reliance. So now the entire focus for the last 3 years has been on manufacturing in India. So we believe that while India was installing close to 10 gigawatts way back in 2019, India was manufacturing only for about 3 to 4 gigawatts. Today, that scenario is changing significantly. So India, in the next 18 to 24 months, will be producing close to 8 to 10 gigawatts worth of material and installing probably 10 to 15 gigawatts a year regularly, or hopefully 20 gigawatts a year. Uh, so yeah, I think we've done many things right. Hindsight is always very clear. We should have done our own focused on manufacturing 10 years back, but it's now that focus there.
So do you feel that the solar industry in India has sort of reached a stage which is close to maturity, or at least not in the early days anymore, where we have
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. As at least in solar policy and generation and installation, EPC, we have one of the finest practices and policies in place, and they've evolved over the last 10 years' time. There's so much to learn by other countries who are planning to install solar now, and now it's almost become a template, because India was amongst the countries which started the concept of auction, reverse auction. Till 2010, 11, 12, when Europe used to be at the forefront of solar energy, starting from Germany, where government used to announce a tariff that, okay, if you set up a solar plant, you will get this tariff from the government so that you can justify your capex. India started by that at 18 rupees, but very quickly moved to auctions. So what they would say is that, okay, we need to set up a 50 megawatt or a 10 megawatt plant. How much money do you need from the government to enable you to give the lowest power, solar power, fed into the grid? Please come and bid for it. The lowest support asked for used to win the bid, and it used to be on a book building basis. So it's not that so suppose you say that I will give you power at 2 rupees 50 paisa. So if that's the lowest, then out of 100 megawatt bid, if somebody says I'm going to build 20 megawatts at 2 rupees 50 paisa, then that 20 megawatt is the winner. Then the next closest is 2 rupees 70 paisa for 10 megawatt. Then that person makes it for 270, and so on. So it goes on till 4 rupees or whatever amount. So there used to be this minimum bid. You cannot go above this. So the entire thing used to move around. So this was a policy which was, I would say, it really was developed and implemented in India with a great amount of success, which brought the costs down so significantly. Indeed.
So Vivek, I also have a couple of questions when it comes to advice for students, young professionals who are looking for a career in the energy industry, specifically, let's say, in the country and in the Asia Pacific region, or so on and so forth, or maybe global roles. What skills, what kind of knowledge would you advise them to gain over, let's say, their life period where they're involved in the working life, or even maybe beyond that? And that also brings me to the second part of the question, is an advice on how should one approach a life of lifelong learning, right? Embracing that learnacy, because I see you and you spend a lot of time reading, learning, even in the later stages of your career. And I think we are in that sort of a time where we cannot ever call ourselves learned, because that concept somehow seems to be disappearing.
This is really, we are still at very early days. Solar is still at early days. So about 20% efficiency. So efficiencies. So on technology side, there is massive room for innovation here, and there's a lot of work going on globally. Especially this work used to happen primarily in Europe, now in the US. But India can leapfrog technologies to move to take us to the completely next step. Pretty much like from landlines, pagers arrived. and pagers were too short-lived in India when mobility took over. So we can have the advantage of all the learnings and leapfrog on technology front. There's so much of work in material science. There are newer and newer materials being explored every day, which can help us convert solar power into energy in a much more efficient manner. There's a lot of groundbreaking work going on globally on that front. Energy storage. Newer materials are being explored every day on what will bring down the cost of energy storage and extend life of these products. So that's on technology and material side. On the other hand, there is a completely different set of work going on in business models on what kind of business models we can will help deliver energy in small packs, big packs, large packs, on grid, off grid. Innovation in business models. There's a lot of work going on in Africa. All the large companies are now tying up with major players and impact investors in hundreds of business models. Someone is delivering power in prepaid meters, someone is delivering power along with telecom equipment, someone is delivering power in like gas cylinders, charged batteries delivered every. So there is a whole lot of work going on innovation on business model. Then financial, because finance cost is amongst the bigger costs in delivering solar power. So how you can finance. So this industry has an entire range of opportunities for youngsters, and above it all, sustainability. So while renewable energy per se is known to be sustainable, but how we can make it even more sustainable over a period of time. Just to give an impact, the e-waste material which this industry is likely to generate by 2050, going by the aggressive projections of speed at which installations are happening, the number of panels which will be used by then will, if they are stacked on top of each other, will create a stairway to the moon and back. That's how massive installations are going to have. Now you can imagine the kind of e-waste it will generate, because each panel has its life of 20-25 years. So entire industry on recycling is likely to emerge. So it's an opportunity which it's waiting to be tapped, and a lot of work needs to happen in that space.
That's very interesting. Probably at one point we're going to talk to you, maybe after this talk. I wanted to also there's something they're doing with respect to fashion also. So there were a lot of these big brands, what are they doing?
Fashion.
Yeah. So a lot of these big brands, now they're asked that you give us your old clothes back, we're going to refurbish them, we're going to redesign them and sell it back to you. So because of the number of clothes which are discarded. Anyway, so I think we just wrap up the last session, yeah? This last question. So thank you, Vivek, for your time. This conversation has been really insightful for me, particularly, to be able to understand how the solar industry specifically is evolving in the country. Before we leave, just 2 words or maybe your 2 cents to young people on what you think should be done to make themselves a lifelong learner.
I think I can tell you with my experience and both personally as well as what I as someone, as a colleague, have been advising everybody who gets in. I mean, I always look for willingness. I never look for capability, because skills and capabilities can be acquired, they can be trained, they can be built over a period of time. But it's the willingness which is much more important. And by willingness here, I mean that hunger for learning, and learning never stops. I don't think after having spent 12 years in this industry, I still feel nervous. When you asked me to come and talk about it for youngsters, I was nervous because I don't think I know enough. I know enough. I don't know what kind of questions you're going to be asking me. I still feel I'm still so not updated about this industry. I have so much to catch up on that at times I struggle that, okay, which area should I focus on to stay abreast with what all is going on? So very clearly, learning never stops. The best way to learn is to learn it the hard way. However, doing some background work doesn't help. So it does help. So that's where my only 2 senses that learning never stops. Uh, and as I think was that Steve Jobs said, right? Stay hungry, stay foolish. That's the only thing I think. Keep doing things which you've never done before. Keep failing, because what failure teaches you, nothing teaches you like that. And if you haven't failed enough, then you haven't tried enough. So that's how I look at it.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Vivek.
Thanks.
Yeah.